The US government has been taken by surprise by the recent wave of anti-American violence unfolding throughout Muslim countries. Following its role in the Arab revolutions, Washington was expecting more gratitude and support from the nations involved. But did the US have a sufficient cultural and social understanding of the region and of the societies of the countries they were intervening in? To discuss that, not only that, we are now joined by sociologist and the head of London School of Economics, Craig Calhoun. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
So what do you think? Was that kind of miscalculation of the US government?
People in the United States and in the West generally were enthusiastic and imagined it was all about them. It was about Facebook, it was about tweets on Twitter, and it was about the definition of democracy that is common in the West. But in fact, it was also about strengthening different countries, trying to establish rights for a wide range of people, not only those who were sympathetic to the West, but for the whole population. The Americans who responded in the first place were indeed taken by surprise, some of them. And when we say, did they know, we have to ask who we mean by they. Did some experts working in parts of the universities in the United States or in intelligence know more than some politicians? Of course. I think that the politicians trying to understand this needed to listen to a wider range of American experts as well as to the world and the people in the region.
They haven't been listening to those people.
Not enough.
And talking about who we've been hearing that from, Hillary Clinton, we've been hearing this frustration from American Secretary of State. She has said, why and how could that happen in the country we helped liberate?
I think here you're talking about Libya.
She's been commenting on the killing of the US ambassador in Libya, exactly.
In Libya. And here I think the situation was always complicated. And that's almost always the case, that there is a lot of complexity. And it's too easy to rush to the conclusion that the future will turn out the way you want it to. And the Libyan case in particular may involve only a minority of Libyans. The Libyan government has also condemned the killings. It's not true that Libya has turned against the United States. On the contrary, Libya has shown a determination on the part of many people, both in the government and in the larger population, to try to get rid of violent armed conflict, to punish and disarm those who killed the American ambassador. So in fact, there is a pretty strong turn against that sort of threat in Libya.
What parts of its strategy should US and its Western allies amend vis-à-vis those countries, Libya and other countries, to avoid negative consequences in the future?
Well, the most important thing, I think, is to be very cautious about a forceful, especially a violent intervention. I think that that's extraordinarily risky, and so we should watch out for advocates of violent intervention. Secondly, I think that it's important to recognize that in every one of these countries, as in every country around the world, there's more than one voice. I think that the US should be very concerned to show that it respects Muslim people, should show that it respects different nationalities.
Where they showed the opposite?
Well, some people, for example, those who made this horrible film about the Prophet, which offers an insult to the Prophet, did not treat Islam with respect. And many in the region think that that somehow represents US policy. It doesn't represent US policy, but the US needs to make it clear.
It's not easy, huh?
It's not easy.
To convince, people.
It's not. And President Obama and Secretary Clinton have both said this. But I think that we need to recognize that just saying it once or twice isn't enough. We have to make sure that this is the basis of the actions of international powers. Part of what that means is encouraging trade, encouraging educational and other cultural linkages, so that there is a growing relationship of trust and mutual understanding. But it's not easy in countries where people have not had many opportunities, where they find it hard to trust not only international powers, but their own government on many occasions, where there's not the experience of easy, friendly management of differences, but differences often lead to violent conflict. In those cases, we have to be patient. And part of the US need in relationship to the Middle East is for patience. We shouldn't expect things to change overnight.
We've seen that it hasn't been a reaction from the entire Muslim society, but from a very special group of this society.
That's right.
Was that actually at all possible to avoid this, while those people, they may have been, waiting for something like this?
It's never impossible to get rid of such possibilities. It's never impossible to guarantee anything 100% in international affairs or in terms of domestic peace, especially when there are people who want to have a disruption. I don't think that we are going to influence those people who want violence and who are willing to use those tactics. But I think we can have an influence on how much sympathy there is in the broader population by making sure that we don't back repressive regimes and become associated with them, that we are appropriately respectful in matters of religion.
Is this the cause behind and why the interventions supposed to bring democracy and freedom and peace and prosperity brought instead violence and chaos, actually?
The chaos that we see around us is structural. It's built into the system. That doesn't mean it always has to get out of hand or always produce violence, but it means that we can't imagine it away. We can't imagine it will just go away if we get one perfect policy. We have to resist most of the time the impulse to think that there are just good guys and bad guys, and if we intervene to help the good guys, then everything will get better. I think the proof of that story is Libya. It's something we have to listen to in relation to Syria.
I've actually witnessed the beginning of the conflict in this country and just been there recently. It is indeed very complicated what's going on in Syria. With regard to all this complexity of the situation and of the Syrian society particularly, how you see the conflict playing out there?
Well, I can give you two different answers because on the one hand, a prediction, on the other hand, a hope. My prediction, unfortunately, is that a bad situation will get worse. My hope is that before that happens, there will be a way to stop the violence enough to get people talking to each other about a more peaceful transition. So far, the international community has shown that it is not clear. It doesn't know what to do. I don't think anyone is entirely on the right of this. It's not a good idea to back a repressive regime and to give it the hope, I think false hope, that it can stay in power and overcome the threats to it. But it's not a good idea to imagine that rebels are somehow all Democrats, all liberal, all people who are going to simply work for a good future.
They're absolutely not.
They have their own sectional interests, their own personal grievances, their own different kinds of factions.
And the opposition is very much divided.
Extremely. That's why I use the word factions. It's divided. There's not even a clear majority. If the United States invades Syria, that's a disaster. To sell arms to one side or the other is to continue the conflict. And right now, both sides are getting arms on the international market very easily with different backers. That means more people will be killed. Possibly the best action would be to try to reduce the global availability of arms. And here, both of our countries are at fault.
What impact do Western-led interventions have on the societies in those countries? In terms of mentality, let's say, how people did change or could change following those interventions. I can see myself that, people, they've changed.
The process of rebuilding, of peace building, right, is cultural change, it's education, it's economic relations, right, and it's developing legitimate government. Every one of those is made harder by war and conflict.
Okay, what about the Western societies? How did they change following all these events? It's through massive popular pressure that the West is withdrawing from countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're feeling kind of war fatigue in those societies.
That's right. 2001 and the attacks of that year of September 11th are, in a way, a symbol for it. They aren't the only source, but the anxiety about the Middle East and about Islam has become an acute thing for many Western countries. It's shaped by different factors. In Europe, there's an anxiety about immigration. In the US, it really is more tied to conflicts linked to the Middle East and the sense of having been attacked in the homeland. This has affected a large population, and it's affected some people by making them hostile towards Muslims. It's affected other people by making them worried about the change in America. And you're right to say America has changed. America has adopted new security legislation that make it a less free country because we have more surveillance. And we have that because people are worried about public security. What will happen if there's another bombing? So what's happened in the Western countries is that the fear is more basic. And so more people are making their choices based on fear, and not as many people are making their choices based on hope or optimism about living together peacefully.
Let's now talk about London School of Economics and its experience that they call themselves the bad chapter of the school's history. The LSE has had very special relations with the regime of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, former Libyan leader, and especially with his son, Saif al-Islam. I've interviewed Saif in Tripoli, and he's been talking a lot about how did this experience change him. I guess it's been a mutual change. So it's been all okay until one moment when the British government turned away from Libyan leadership at that time. And this is exactly what happened with the school itself, and some kind of hypocrisy here. Don't you agree with that?
I don't think there was a hypocrisy. I think we have to say something rather similar to what I said about countries, that there were disagreements. There was not just one side. The school has been faulted for receiving money from a foundation linked to Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of Muammar Gaddafi. There were objections, there was an argument, there were disagreements. The school never had a whole position where it said, oh, Gaddafi's regime okay or not okay. We don't take positions on regimes in that way. There was a complicated situation, and it got extremely simplified in the way it was written about in the press.
So it's been completely independent in that case, right?
That's a very strong statement. It has been more independent than is sometimes suggested. I think completely independent. It receives money from the government.
It hasn't been influenced by the government's attitude.
Government influence did not control the attitudes or what went on in the school. Choices were made in the school. The school is influenced, right, in various ways by public opinion more broadly, by governments, right? But we try to maintain enough autonomy that we always protect that intellectual freedom.
So you said mistakes were made. So you are now the head of London School of Economics. I'm sure you will do your best to avoid those mistakes in the future, right?
I'm sure I will find future mistakes to make.
Oh.
I think that there is no leader of any institution of any size who doesn't make some mistakes.
Well, wish you good luck with all those mistakes to come. Thank you very much for being with us.